Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions, and today's theme is education and lifelong learning. As usual, short and succinct questions and answers would be appreciated. Question number 1, Alison McInnes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the General Teaching Council for Scotland's proposal that overseas teachers wishing to work in Scotland could no longer be subject to a criminal record check.
Minister Alistair Allen.
The Scottish Government is determined that appropriate steps are taken to ensure that our children are safe and secure, and that parents have confidence in the arrangements in place for safeguarding their children. The General Teaching Council for Scotland has been an independent body since April 2012, and it is for the GTCS to satisfy themselves about the credentials of teachers coming to Scotland and to review their procedures as they are doing at the moment.
Alison McInnes.
I thank the Minister for his response. It appears there are cases where it isn't possible for the GTCS to acquire details of applicants' criminal history, perhaps because they are refugees or because their native country doesn't operate a criminal record system. And if there is evidence that suitable qualified teachers are being turned away due to insurmountable bureaucratic circumstances out with their control, then surely this could be addressed. Alternative means of determining the suitability of a candidate could be identified. However, where there are reliable records available, shouldn't parents be satisfied that the safety of their children is sufficiently protected by, for example, checking applicants' references from past employers or their qualifications instead? Is the Minister aware of how many of the reported 186 people from outside the UK who applied to register with the GTCS were last year unable to provide details of the criminal records due to exceptional circumstances?
Minister.
Well, the member points to the important issue of ensuring the safety of our children, but she also, of course, points to one of the reasons why I understand, and I stress they are an independent body, one of the reasons why I understand the GTCS are, of course, examining this issue again and examining the different circumstances that obtain in different countries. Of course, there are a number of questions for them to consider, not least the fact that, of course, some things are considered crimes in some countries that aren't here. The member points to the bureaucratic difficulties that exist in getting information from other countries. But I do want the member to rest assured that at the very heart of what I understand the GTCS is doing is trying to maintain and improve standards around child safety, not in any way to compromise them.
Thank you. Question number 2, Siobhan McMahon.
To ask the Scottish Government when it last met representatives of Skills Development Scotland and what issues were discussed.
Minister Angela Constance.
Scottish Government officials meet regularly with Skills Development Scotland counterparts to discuss and monitor the progress of Skills Development Scotland programmes. In addition to this, I meet regularly, quarterly, with both the Chair and Chief Executive of Skills Development Scotland just to discuss issues of importance in the delivery of key ministerial priorities in the youth employment agenda. The most recent meeting with the Chair and Chief Executive took place on the 28th of January.
Siobhan McMahon.
Thank you. The recent Audit Scotland report on modern apprenticeships highlighted that the Scottish Government has not published an explicit statement of its overall aim for modern apprenticeships since 2007. The report states that the Scottish Government's annual ministerial guidance letter to SDS focuses on how SDS should allocate apprenticeship places rather than what the Scottish Government expects modern apprenticeships to achieve. What steps will the Minister now take to ensure that the aims and objectives are publicised to all organisations involved in delivering apprenticeships and to employers and apprentices?
Minister.
I think I'm very explicit with Skills Development Scotland on the Government's priorities, and that's reflected in guidance letters. I should say to the member that the Audit Scotland report into the apprenticeship programme was very positive. It commented on the significant achievements of the programme, such as the increasing numbers. We know that 92% of people who complete an apprenticeship sustain employment. We know achievement rates are up, and we know that the employment rate for people with an apprenticeship qualification sits at 80% higher than their counterparts who don't have an apprenticeship qualification. Nonetheless, I think the Audit Scotland report made a number of sensible suggestions, and we as a government will be considering those recommendations from Audit Scotland, and in particular the need for more detailed longer-term work about the longer-term impact, positive impact. We know that many European countries have are well able to demonstrate the long-term economic impact of apprenticeships, and we, of course, would like to emulate that and do the same. And there's other work going on in terms of wood that will be helpful as well.
Mary Scanlon.
Thank you. Given the importance of quality of training for modern apprenticeships, why are there no equivalent independent reviews on the quality of training provided by training providers outside the further education sector, again, as stated in the recent Audit Scotland report?
Minister.
There's also important recommendations in this regard that's contained in the interim Wood report. Certainly Skills Development Scotland has its own ongoing evaluation, but Education Scotland will now have a role in the external evaluation of things such as the Modern Apprenticeship Programme. So we are, of course, confident that we have a good quality programme, and that's important, and that's seen by employer satisfaction rates and also the completion rates and achievement rates in particular, as well as people going on to sustainable employment. But of course, we're in the business of continuous improvement, and where we can achieve continuous improvement, we most certainly will.
Colin Beattie.
Does the Minister agree that what disabled people need is the money to live on, and that continuous welfare cuts...
Sorry, Mr Beattie, I think you've pressed your button on the wrong question. We're on question number 2, Skills Development Scotland.
Oh, my apologies.
Okay, thank you. Question number 3, Kenneth Gibson.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it encourages schools to teach pupils about the Scottish Enlightenment and its impact on Scotland and beyond.
Minister Alistair Allen.
The experiences and outcomes of Curriculum for Excellence provide ample opportunity for the study of the people, ideas and ideals of the Scottish Enlightenment and their significant global impact as part of a wide-ranging and inspiring curriculum for our young people. The Government encourages learning about Scotland and has supported the introduction of a Scottish Studies Award. Education Scotland has a dedicated resource on the Enlightenment, including its global impact in its Scotland's History web pages.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the Minister for his reply. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Enlightenment had a major and long-lasting impact on Western thought, empiricism and inductive reasoning, literature, economics, sociology, anthropology, science, medicine, mathematics and music. I mean, at a time when Scots suffer from collective self-doubt, surely it's time to ensure that the Enlightenment and Scotland's intellectual contribution to the work is actually a major part of the curriculum rather than just a potential part of the curriculum.
Minister.
I am pleased to say that the teaching of history in our schools has changed considerably since perhaps the member and I were at school. Scottish history, including the Enlightenment, is a strong theme in Curriculum for Excellence from the early stages of primary school onwards. And it should be said that Scottish history forms a mandatory element of the national qualifications, comprising a third of the content for the new qualifications, up to higher alongside European and British history. And young people can also take the Scottish Studies Award in the senior phase, including material around that available on the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, on which I should say I have often considered the member the very living embodiment.
Question number 4, Ken McIntosh.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many SQA academic appeals were submitted in 2013 and how many were upheld.
Minister Alistair Allen.
The information is available on the Scottish Qualifications Authority website. There were 66,204 appeals submitted to the SQA in 2013, of which 31,930 were successful.
I thank the Minister
Ken
for that.
McIntosh.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank the Minister for that answer? And it does confirm my understanding that every year since 2007 there have been roughly 60,000 appeals, and of those 4 in 10 are successful. Now, given that information, and given that the SQA have also confirmed to me that the Scottish Government is working on the basis that next year the number of appeals is expected to be limited to under 30,000, and that furthermore it won't be an appeal, but it will be simply limited to a marking review or a clerical check, does he actually think that's fair to pupils who do not do themselves justice on the day?
Minister.
Well, as the member is aware, the changes that have been made to the appeals system are the result of a very wide consultation which has included the teaching profession. And part of the aim has, of course, been to bring the process back to its original aims, which are to ensure that people who have exceptional circumstances and can't perform in the exam on the day are not penalised, and to ensure that exams are correctly marked. But I would reject the accusation that there is a limitation being placed on the option to appeal. In fact, there will be a much wider ability to make a request for an exam check than has been the case in the past, and different forms of evidence will be able to be taken into account.
Liz Smith.
Could I thank the Minister for the letter that he sent me earlier in the week, clarifying one of the questions I asked at the previous session, where it's now clear that local authorities are responsible for the fees that have to be paid for an unsuccessful request to review marking. Could I ask whether the Minister is confident that all schools now know what their local authority policy is?
Minister.
Well, it is certainly incumbent on all local authorities to make that information available to their schools. Certainly some local authorities are dealing with this matter centrally, others are devolving the decision to schools, but all local authorities should indeed be making that clear to schools and indeed to candidates.
Thank you. Question number 5, Drew Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what share of the UK Research Council's funding Scottish universities currently receive.
Minister Alistair Allen.
According to data provided by the Research Councils UK, Scotland's universities and research institutes secured £307 million from the Research Councils in 2012-13, representing 10.7% of total Research Council spend of £2.9 billion.
Drew Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Minister for that answer. And on a population share, Scotland would certainly get less. Given that Professor Paul Boyce told the Education Committee yesterday that there is no single research council that spans more than one country in the UK, there is no doubt that support for research is one of the many positive benefits of continuing a partnership with the rest of the UK. So can I ask the Minister what discussions he or his ministerial colleagues have had directly with universities in Glasgow about their research priorities? The White Paper talks about funding Scottish priorities. What does the SNP see these as being, and what reassurances will he offer academics, particularly in advanced science collaborations, that their work would continue to be a Scottish priority?
Minister.
Well, the Cabinet Secretary has on a number of occasions met with academics from around the country, but I do feel the member, with respect, is missing a fundamental point, and that is this, that the research funding which Scotland and Scotland's universities receive from research councils is not allocated either on the basis of a population share or on the basis perhaps of charity. It's allocated on the basis of academic excellence, and that is why we do well. And the Scottish Government is committed not only to maintaining a single research area, but to maintaining Scotland's contribution financially to that. And I have no doubt that Scotland will continue under independence to have the excellent research institutes it currently does, who will benefit accordingly.
Gordon MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As a Scottish Government and an independent Scotland with powers over immigration policy, does the Minister agree with me that we could attract leading research talent from around the world to study and settle in Scotland, which would greatly enhance the prospects of further inward investment in research funding for Scottish universities?
Minister.
Well, yes, the member makes an important point that the big threat, if we want to use that language, to research degrees in Scotland and activity in universities is not posed by any constitutional change, but it's posed by the attitude that the United Kingdom government takes towards the issue of immigration. And that's not just my view, it's the view of Professor Pete Downes, convener of Universities Scotland, who described the UK's immigration policy as it applied to universities at present in these terms: as I scan the policy horizon, it's hard to see a bigger risk or a more poisonous gun pointed at our collective success.
Question number 6, John Mason.
To ask the Scottish Government how schools are teaching about sectarianism.
Minister Alistair Allen.
Education Scotland, the national body for supporting quality improvement in Scottish education, promotes diversity and equality in its work and has a specific work stream on combating sectarianism. This work focuses on identifying and sharing good practice, reviewing and improving resources, and engaging in professional dialogue across education in Scotland, and all approved resources are available directly from the Education Scotland website.
John Mason.
I thank the Minister for that answer. And I just wonder if he would agree with me that sectarianism is a very long-running problem that we have in this country. It is not going to be solved overnight. But we need to change attitudes, and that can start with children, and many children are open to dealing with that and looking at and wanting to see that sorted.
Minister.
Well, the member is, of course, right, and I'm sure there will be wide agreement across the chamber that there is no single solution to this issue, but we have to ensure that we continue to work to tackle sectarianism in Scotland. As Rosanna Cunningham, the Minister for Community Safety and Legal Affairs, made clear recently, as she's been taking the lead on this issue, we are building a long-term agenda which can deliver, I hope, a fundamental shift to our culture and our assumptions on this issue, and ensure that we build a Scotland in which everybody feels they have a part to play and are given the respect that they're due.
Question number 7, Nigel Dawn.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to increase the number of young women entering the workplace in an independent Scotland.
Minister Angela Constance.
Presiding Officer, in an independent Scotland, we will make it a constitutional right for every young person to be offered the opportunity of education, work and training, and this alongside the introduction of a system of early intervention to identify and address barriers to work will increase employment levels of all young women and young men in Scotland. And by targeting tailored support to where it is most needed, we can achieve greater employment outcomes and support sustained economic growth.
Nigel Dawn.
I thank the Minister for her comments. I'm just wondering whether the Minister would agree with me that after the recent publication of Scottish Labour's Devolution Commission and the very limited further powers that it seems to be suggesting, whether indeed there is any alternative to the powers of independence to increasing employment opportunities for our sons and daughters.
Minister.
I think it's very important that this Parliament evolves into a Parliament with job-creating powers and where we have access to economic levers as well as skills and education policy. I suppose what surprised me about the recent report from Labour's Commission was that it didn't propose integration of employment services and skills services. To be honest, thought that was a given and accepted as good pragmatic common sense. I'm surprised that they only want to devolve the work programme, which isn't really a power, actually it's a contract and a failing contract at that. I was also surprised that there was no devolution of the work choice, a policy that I've heard Dennis Robertson describe as the greatest secret within the DWP. And, I mean, at the end of the day, my understanding in terms of the most recent social attitudes survey is that 63% of the Scottish population want control over welfare powers.
Kezia Dugdale.
Thank you, President Officer. I thought for a second there we might have had a question about how to get young women into work instead of an attack on the Labour Party. However, whilst there was a lot of welcome news in last week's Unemployment Statistics, Minister, you'll be aware that there was an increase in the number of long-term female unemployment. I would welcome your thoughts on that, and also the fact that the number of women returning to work were actually over 50. There had been very little shift in younger women going into work. What is she going to do now with the powers that she has to address that?
Minister.
Absolutely, and I'm always happy to answer the supplementaries that I'm actually asked at the end of the day, Presiding Officer. I think it is. I think there's two very important aspects to the very serious point that Kezia Dugdale raises, and the first point is about early intervention. And she will be no stranger to my views that when it comes to young women and to young men, we need to intervene early. And that's why I was pleased that this Parliament supported the principle of the European Youth Guarantee. And although I can't implement it in full because I don't have access to Job Centre Plus, I will certainly do everything within the powers of the Scottish Government to implement the European Youth Guarantee as much as possible, because I think it's a pervasive philosophy of this Government, and I think it's shared across the Chamber, that particularly when it comes to young people and young women, as well as young men, that we need to be intervening early, and that we have to be intervening early to prevent youth unemployment becoming long-term unemployment. In terms of the other aspects of the questions, I think Make Young People Your Business campaign is very important, and if I can give a very practical example, I'm sure the member was aware of the week of activity and the ongoing endeavours we'll have around Make Young People Your Business in digital and ICT. And as part of that campaign, and as part of the very structured and focused skills intervention. Gender is very much at the heart of that, because we have a growing industry that is saying that they need 10 to 11,000 new entrants every year. Yet the proportion of women in that particular industry has fallen over the last decade from 30% to 17%. And I hope on that point we can unite.
Question number 8, John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what it does to promote the use of technology to assist teaching in schools.
Alistair Allen.
The Scottish Government wants all educators, learners and parents to take full advantage of the opportunities offered by technology in order to raise attainment, ambition and opportunities for all. To support this, a significant programme of work focused specifically on ICT and learning is being undertaken. The programme includes 3 main strands: operating conditions, which will help to ensure that schools have the necessary infrastructure and policies in place to support our ambitions for ICT and learning; GLOW, which provides all educators and learners with free and secure access to a range of tools, services and collaborative online workspaces; and enriching teaching, enhancing learning, which focuses on curricular content, learning and teaching strategies and support for teachers in embedding the use of ICT in their practice.
John Finney.
I thank the Minister for that comprehensive response. Education Scotland's website, Minister, commends video conferencing and the collaborative work that can take place with that. And you yourself will know the benefits connected with Gaelic medium education. In the region I represent, there are challenges connected with small secondary schools, both in terms of the number of years tuition that can be given and the range of subjects. It's a particular concern at the moment with Tyree High School. What steps will the Scottish Government take to encourage collaboration within and across local authorities to maintain the number of subjects, to maintain the number of years and to maintain communities, because that's a threat to communities if we don't have viable secondary schools?
Minister.
Well, the member makes a series of important points about secondary education in rural areas. I'm familiar, it's been brought, I think, to my colleague Mike Russell, the constituency MSP in the past, the issue he raises about Tyree, and more generally the difficulties which sometimes there can be in ensuring that teachers and subject options are in place in some of our smallest secondary schools. I think what has to be said there is that, as the member has indicated, we have to encourage local authorities to be imaginative in the use of ICT, but above all to ensure that the same offering, as much as is humanly possible, is available to people across Scotland in terms of the choice that exists in our education system.
Question number 9, Anne McTaggart.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what measures it has put in place to increase opportunities for disabled students to access further education.
Minister Angela Constance.
The Scottish Funding Council makes funding available to colleges to ensure that they have the resources they need to meet the additional support needs of disabled students. Additionally, I have asked the Scottish Funding Council to work with Enable, the Scottish Consortium for Learning Disabilities and other partners to improve outcomes for this group. A range of measures are in place, including the creation of support posts in a number of colleges and a good practice guide. In its outcome agreements guidance for next year, the Scottish Funding Council has made clear that improving access is a national priority for people from a wide range of backgrounds, including learners with disabilities. In meeting this priority, colleges will be expected to pay close attention to flexible learning and teaching, individual support and carefully managed transitions.
Anne McTaggart.
I thank the Minister for that response. In light of the significant contribution made by young carers right across Scotland, and in particular the member of the Scottish Youth Parliament, what level of financial assistance has the Scottish Government made available to assist physically disabled young people and young carers to progress from courses of further education to undergraduate level qualifications?
Minister.
There's two sources of funding that comes to mind in response to Ms McTaggart's direct question. There is the additional support needs for learning allowance, and that's a non-income based allowance, and it can be used for a wide variety of costs, and it's very flexible, so it can be used for accommodation, travel or study related costs. And in terms of students that are articulating from college to university, she may be aware of the recent announcement that those students will also be subject to the council tax exemption. And if there's further, more specific information that Ms McTaggart would like, I'd be happy to ensure that that's followed up in writing.
Colin Beattie.
Does the Minister agree that what disabled people need is the money to live on, and that continuous welfare cuts from successive UK governments are holding disabled people back?
Minister.
Just to say to the member that obviously from my perspective and the perspective of the Scottish Government, we feel we could deliver a more rounded experience and opportunities for students and learners and people getting into work if we could align services in terms of education, tax and welfare. And of course members will be aware that there are further welfare cuts pending, and that has to be of concern.
Question number 10, Jim Eadie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what representations it has received regarding proposed strike action by the University and College Union.
Minister Angela Constance.
Presiding Officer, I am not aware of any direct representations received on this matter.
Jim Eadie.
The Minister will be aware that staff in the higher education sector have seen their pay drop in real terms by over 13% on average over the last 5 years, while Principals and Vice-Chancellors have this year received an increase of 5%. While collective pay bargaining arrangements are carried out on a UK-wide basis, is she aware of what steps are being taken to encourage positive dialogue in the UK pay bargaining rounds that begin today, so that a swift and satisfactory end can be brought to this dispute?
Minister.
As Mr Reid will be well aware, higher education institutions are autonomous, although I am aware of the circumstances that he describes in his question. The view of this government is that although higher education institutions are responsible entirely for setting their terms and conditions for their staff, that said, we would expect employers to enter into negotiations with unions and staff in a positive way, informed by fairness and taking account of the current economic climate. And perhaps if I could remind Chamber of the Cabinet Secretary Michael Russell's quote in this chamber to a topical PQ in January, where he said, "I expect university senior management and governing bodies to demonstrate clear leadership and accountability by ensuring that pay awards to the principals are not out of step with those available to staff, and to ensure the highest standards of transparency as recommended by the Vaughan Pronzinski Review of Higher Education Governance."
Question number 11, Mary Fee.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when its policy on childcare in an independent Scotland will be completed.
Minister Aileen Campbell.
This Government's policy will only be complete when we have ensured the provision of childcare matches the very best, and will only rest when the barriers that stop too many people, particularly women, from entering the labour market are broken down, freeing women to make the best choice for their own families. That's why this Government's long-term aim is to ensure that all children from age 1 to school age will be entitled to 1,140 hours of high-quality childcare per year, which is broadly the same number of hours provided at primary school. As set out in Scotland's Future, we will deliver this provision by the end of the second Parliament after independence, benefiting around 240,000 children and 212 families each year.
Mary Fee.
I thank the Minister for that answer. As the Minister will no doubt be aware, the National Day Nurses Association warned this week that the current system could not deliver the expansion proposed by the Scottish Government. So can the Minister tell us what additional costs are required to meet this expansion, and if those in the current system cannot meet it, who will?
Minister.
It's of course up to local authorities to determine fair and sustainable settlements locally with partner providers. Although I do want to point out that Purnima Tanaku said yesterday that while she raised some concerns, she did say that to support the Scottish Government's plan and independent providers would be at the very heart of that expansion. Now, we've set out in the Scotland's Future that we plan to undertake a review of our cost structure based on international examples, and absolutely NDNA will be part of that dialogue. We should point out also that this Government has funded NDNA for the first time to ensure that they are able to play a full part and a full role in terms of developing our childcare policy. But I do go back to the point again, it's only with independence, when we have the full powers at our disposal, will we be able to truly transform childcare. And in the words of Jackie Brock, who said that the White Paper was a game changer in this debate.
Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Minister agree with the leading economist, Professor Sir Donald Mackay, who said that we need both sides of the balance sheet to implement the transformational childcare proposals as outlined in Scotland's Future?
Minister.
Yes, Professor Mackay was an economic advisor to successive Secretaries of State, including Malcolm Rifkin and Donald Dewar, as well as Chair of Scottish Enterprise. So members would do well to heed on his advice. He's quite right to point out that the substantial boost to revenues generated by more women entering the labour market currently goes to Westminster and are therefore not available to help fund more childcare. With independence, that money, Scotland's money, can be invested in our future, helping to pay for the transformation of childcare that we all want to see.
Briefly, Neil Bibby.
The Scottish Government have told us the first stage of their childcare policies would cost £100 million and the second stage £700 million. But they've not told us how much the third stage and the total cost of their childcare policies would be. The White Paper was published on the 26th of November. It's now the 26th of March. Four months
please,
on,
Mr. Bibby.
Can the Minister tell us, quite simply, what is the total cost of the White Paper childcare policies?
Minister.
Well, we've set out very clearly our ultimate aspiration to make sure that we can transform childcare, and that very much rests with having the full powers at our disposal, which includes making sure that we get access to the revenue that we'll generate through allowing more parents to get back into work. And if we allow Scotland's women to participate at Swedish levels, that will allow us to generate up to £700 million to reinvest that back into childcare. But I should also point out that Labour completely misses the point that the transformational impact that childcare will have, because they only ever consider the additional income tax paid by an individual, not the full basket of taxes that would be collected under independence. I have to say that this heckling, persistent heckling, does the Labour Party no favours, which clearly have no ideas, no notion of how they want to deliver. They came to the Children and Young People's Bill with incoherent, unfunded propositions to try and increase the hours of taxation. And I think we should work together to make sure that we can try and make sure that this childcare policy benefits children and young people and helps families across the country.
Question number 12 has been withdrawn for understandable reasons, so I turn to question number 13. Tavish Scott.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government when it last met the appointed chairs of the regional college boards and what matters were discussed.
Minister Angela Constance.
The Cabinet Secretary Michael Russell has not met the chairs since their appointment, but intends to do so shortly.
Tavish Scott.
Thank you. Bray High School pupils asked me how the new national qualifications and curriculum for excellence will lead to vocational education and a place at college. And when the Cabinet Secretary does find time to meet the college board chairs, will he undertake to explain to pupils right across Scotland how the new structure, particularly on national qualifications, is going to help them find a college place?
Minister.
I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary does that on a day-to-day basis.
Question number 14, Kezia Dugdale.
To ask the Scottish Government how it supports mothers to return to education part-time.
Minister Angela Constance.
College students are being supported with record levels of financial support, over £102 million this academic year in bursaries, childcare and discretionary funds. Mothers in particular are supported by the discretionary childcare fund and the lone parent childcare grant, an entitlement payment of up to £1,215 per year. Those who wish to return to university part-time can apply to the Students' Award Agency for Scotland for help towards the cost of tuition fees and to the discretionary funds for help with the childcare costs. And additionally, we have invested £6.6 million in 2013-14 and will do so again in 2014-15 for additional part-time opportunities at college, including for mothers who want to return to education.
Kezia Dugdale.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. If a woman's highest qualification is a standard grade, she has a 50% chance of being employed. If it's a HNC or HND, it's 74%, and if it's a degree, it's 84%. So if the SNP government want more mums in work, they're going to have to give them the skills and the education so it can compete. Why then have the SNP government cut 93,000 places for women to study part-time in our colleges since 2007?
Minister.
I think it's not surprising that Ms Dugdale deliberately blisters the issue. She is trying to confuse the issue between headcount and full-time equivalents. And can I just say, you know, this is the old apple and oranges comparison, and that we shouldn't necessarily conflate with the same measurement a course that is unrecognised and lasts a few hours with that of an HNC, HND, and that's why we have a measurement in terms of full-time equivalent. I think it is important, I think where I can agree with the member, that we have to have a balance and it is nonetheless important that we have a range of opportunities for our people with a range of abilities, and people will come to education with different levels of qualifications. But it has to be good for young people and women of all ages that we are increasing opportunities for more people to study full-time, to study recognised qualifications, and qualifications such as HNCs, HNDs. The number of people, we now have 4,000 more people studying HNCs and HNDs in Scotland. And I speak not just as the Minister for Youth Employment, but I also, as the member will know, have responsibility for women's employment issues. So we do have to get the right balance. Female unemployment today is 6.5%. But of course, youth unemployment remains at 19.1%. But we do need that range of qualifications and opportunities. And actually, when you look at specific colleges, there are some colleges in Scotland where the majority of students are women, and the majority of students are students over 25. So I believe that the system does create that flexibility.
Question number 15, Gordon MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many local authorities have a youth employment strategy similar to the Edinburgh Guarantee.
Minister Angela Constance.
The Edinburgh Guarantee is an excellent example of how local authorities are tackling youth unemployment. All local authorities across Scotland have a similar strategy or have specific measures in place to tackle youth unemployment and provide positive destinations for young people.
Gordon MacDonald.
I thank the Minister for that answer. The City Council introduced the Edinburgh Guarantee in 2011, along with its business partners, to provide positive outcomes for the capital's young people. This resulted in 150 organisations matching 650 school leavers and young people with employment, modern apprenticeship, college or training courses opportunities, and the Council achieving 91% of school leavers entering a positive destination. Will the Minister join me in welcoming the Council's decision to continue to support the Edinburgh Guarantee in its 2014-15 budget?
Minister.
Yes, I think I'm on record as supporting the Edinburgh Guarantee. There's a number of members across the chamber that have an interest in it and have expressed support in it. I think the significant thing about the Edinburgh Guarantee is it shows a can-do approach by the local authority, and as the member indicated that there is a significant improvement in school leaver destinations in Edinburgh. They have turned themselves around from being below the national average to now being on a par with the Scottish average, and that has to be commended. And if I can just say to the member, by sheer coincidence, I was actually in his constituency this morning visiting a local employer that's participating in the Edinburgh Guarantee.
Many thanks. Question number 16, Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government on what basis it considers that its childcare plans for an independent Scotland would create a 6% rise in female employment.
Minister Aileen Campbell.
Improving access to affordable childcare reduces an important barrier to labour market participation faced by some parents with small children, as highlighted by both the European Commission and the OECD. The European Commission found that 73% of mothers in the UK who didn't work or worked part-time because of inadequate childcare services cited childcare as being too expensive. The Childcare Market Participation Economic Analysis paper we published in January set out the potential impacts on economic output and tax revenues if Scotland's female participation rate increased by 6 percentage points to match Sweden.
Mark Griffin.
The detailed modelling on the impact of that policy, which is still has to be completed, could show that the rise in female employment is less than the illustrative figure the Minister's just given of 6%. If the rise in employment is lower than that 6%, will it result in a redrafting of the policy?
Minister.
We've tasked the economic advisers to come back and will publish their report in springtime. But certainly what I would point the member to as well, that perhaps he should listen to the words of the Association of Scottish Businesswomen, Alison Henderson, who was interviewed by the BBC this morning, when she said, at the moment, women running their own businesses contribute £5 billion to the Scottish economy. But if there was an equal number of businesses run by women and men, then that's women's contribution would be £13 billion. So the effect of childcare provision on helping women get get into their own businesses and actually focus there, it could be enormous. So I think there's an awful lot of debate around this, but certainly our purpose of trying to transform childcare is partly to get women back into work, but it's also about making sure we've got high quality provision there as well. But certainly we can only ever realise that the potential of getting more women back into work if we have the powers of independence, that we can reinvest the money, the taxes that we raise and generate through increased participation in the workforce. We can only do that if we have the powers of independence. So that's why we want to transform childcare to allow children and young people to flourish.
Thank you. That concludes this afternoon's questions. But before we move on to the next item, can I remind members who have questions that they should be here for the start of question time. They should remain until the end of question time unless they have a reason that they have notified to the presiding officer. I noticed that some members were not complying with that this afternoon. I'll allow a few moments for members to change seats before the next item of business.